When I tell people I do astrophotography, I oftentimes get questions wondering how it all works. When I try to give a short answer, most people simply don't understand it. This is my attempt at shortening over a year of experience into a manageable length. To put it simply, astrophotography is a deeply technical hobby where you can spend years just trying to wrap your head around all of it. To start off, you must differentiate the two main kinds of astrophotography. These types being wide-field astrophotography, often referred to as landscape or nightscape, and deep space astrophotography. In wide-field astro, as the name suggests, you are taking a wide view of the night sky and generally include landscape in the foreground. This is typically done with a camera and wide-angle lens on a tripod or star tracker. Also, most wide-field images are made relatively quickly, usually in less than an hour. In deep space astro, however, you focus more on individual structures and regions in space. This is usually accomplished using telescopes or telephoto lenses on large equatorial mounts. Furthermore, images using this method often take many hours to complete, and in certain cases, it can take months for you to complete an image. Personally, I fit between wide-field and deep space astrophotography, but I lean closer to deep space. I do this by using a 135mm telephoto lens on a star tracker. This allows me to achieve a zoom level in between a wide-angle lens and a telescope. By doing so, I can capture most objects a deep space astrophotographer would shoot, but the lesser zoom allows me to view them in context with the areas around them. Most things in space are incredibly faint, so you will need very long exposures to properly get enough light, but very quickly you will run into a problem. It isn't something we think of often, but the stars at night don't actually stay in place. As the Earth rotates about its axis, the stars and everything else in space appears to move at a constant speed. When taking long exposures, this will cause your stars and everything else in the image to smear across your camera. To counteract this smear, devices have been created that rotate the camera in the exact opposite motion of the Earth to make the sky appear motionless. As the night sky is locked in place, you can take much longer exposures. These devices, called mounts, come in many different sizes, with the smaller ones rated for lenses and small telescopes, while the larger ones are able to carry over 100 pounds of payload. As a side note, on the topic of gear, well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, astrophotography can be very expensive. It's not uncommon to find people spending the equivalent of a decent used car on equipment. That being said, there are things you can do to mitigate some of the costs. By going the small and compact route, you can save a lot of money. My setup consists of a tripod, small equatorial mount, full-frame Canon DSLR, and a 135mm f2 lens. If you buy used, you can get my or an equivalent setup for about the same price as a new iPhone. Most deep space objects can be classified into 5 different categories: emission nebulae, reflection nebulae, dark nebulae, star clusters, and galaxies. Typically, the brightest and most dynamic images come from emission nebulae. These are large clouds of gas, typically a mix of hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur, and a couple others, that are ionized by powerful stars nearby. Think neon signs in space, but starlight is what powers them instead of electricity. Another popular target is reflection nebulae. These targets are typically heavier elements or clouds of dust that actually reflect starlight. These nebulae glow the same color as the stars associated with them. Similarly to reflection nebulae are dark nebulae. These are clouds of dust, but instead of reflecting light, they block out the stars behind them. These nebulae are typically much dimmer than reflection nebulae, which gives them their name. Another target, star clusters, differ from the other targets in that they're actually quite bright, but these clumps of stars are still just as magnificent as the other targets. Now, as you might guess, galaxies are quite popular targets as well, but unlike the previous targets, with the exception of certain star clusters, they reside outside the Milky Way. These targets reside millions of light years away, which allows us to look back in time in a sense every time we view them. So now we have an idea of what's up there. How do we find them? This is Stellarium, a planetarium software similar to a lot of the apps you can get on your phone. In this program, I can visualize how the night sky is going to look at certain times and where objects are in relation to each other. Using the date tool, I can even see how stuff is going to look way ahead of time or even further back in time. Also, I can input my camera gear so I can see how certain targets are going to look without having to manually shoot them. I can tell that if I tried to shoot this target, it would be way too small. But over here, this seems to fill my frame nicely. The default view uses known positions of real targets and overlays set images for each one. This is good for certain targets, but a lot of things aren't visible using this method. For example, in the constellation Cygnus, there are a couple objects visible, but there are many areas where there seems to be nothing. However, if I switched viewing those to an all-sky survey, I would be presented with a completely different looking region of space. This survey gives a nearly complete view of the entire night sky. Finally, when I find an interesting target, I can select it and then speed up time. By doing this, I can see how long these targets are going to be up in the sky. By using the framing tool and different viewing options, I can find what targets are best suited for my particular gear. I would be remiss to not talk about the weather, light pollution, and even moon cycles. It is quite simple. If there are clouds, you can't see the stars. While there are many websites that try to forecast the weather, ultimately, the weather can be very erratic and forecasts often shift unexpectedly. It's not uncommon for a completely clear forecast to fall apart even hours beforehand. Also, weather can be quite streaky, with you sometimes getting 5 or 6 days straight without a single cloud, only to be followed up with a month straight of bad weather. We experienced this last summer with Houston only receiving 3 to 4 clear nights over the course of about 4 months. Now, on to light pollution. Light pollution basically acts like a form of noise. It washes out the faint structures of many deep space objects. Only the brightest targets are imageable from my backyard. Aside from star clusters and certain emission nebulae, almost all the deep space targets need to be shot from dark skies. Using a tool like lightpollutionmap.com, you can find places with low light pollution. Luckily, I'm a member of the Houston Astronomical Society, which grants me access to their own private dark site located out near Columbus, Texas. By making the nearly hour-and-a-half drive, I can image under skies literally 1/1000th of the light pollution of back home. For example, this image was taken under dark skies. It is 150 seconds long at ISO 800. This image was taken from my backyard, and it is 10 seconds long at ISO 400. The image taken from the dark sky is 15 times longer and double the ISO. This means that it should be approximately 30 times brighter, but the image taken from my backyard is still brighter overall due to the amount of light pollution present in the image. Another aspect of light pollution you might not often think about is actually the moon. The moon basically acts like a giant mirror in space that reflects sunlight onto the Earth. The more of the moon that's illuminated, the more light pollution it casts into the night sky. From home, moon or no moon hardly makes a difference, but at a dark site where light pollution is very low, the moon can make a very dramatic difference on the apparent darkness of the site. The good thing is that the moon is cyclical, meaning that for about a week surrounding the new moon, the moon is either not in the sky at all, or its effect is very minimal, and we can plan accordingly. The processing step can make or break your image. This is the part of astrophotography that is by far the most complicated. There are thousands of different tools, programs, and methods you can use during this step, and it's easy to make mistakes. However, during this step, you get to unleash the astrophotographer's secret weapon, stacking. By running multiple pictures through a process called stacking, you can effectively add the light gathered by each individual picture and work to eliminate noise. So, hopefully by now you have a decent idea of how all this works. One last thing I should mention is that while there is certainly plenty of stuff that you can learn, it doesn't take much to start off. In fact, next time you find yourself away from the city, whether that's from vacation or visiting family, try to find the time to go outside at night. Most phones these days have a pro mode where you can change the shutter speed and ISO. If you can prop up your phone against something sturdy, try your hand at a couple shots. You might be surprised what you get. The first pictures I took were with my sister's phone that I set up on the roof of our car. I then graduated to using my mom's cheap point-and-shoot camera that I set up on a very unsteady tripod. The images I got from it were far from perfect, but it didn't stop me from enjoying the process. It is really easy to become discouraged when things don't go according to plan. Weather, busy schedules, and malfunctioning equipment can all seriously put a damper on the process, but these setbacks only make the progress even more rewarding. This is the first image I took of the Orion Nebula. Yeah, not the best. But can you imagine how I felt 4 months later when I took this image? That first picture from my sister's phone? This is the same area less than a year later. At the end of the day, it's not about the pictures. I'm not going out and selling prints of the images I take. I really don't even share them outside of close friends and family. With each consecutive image, I can see my skills progressing, and every time I go outside at night, I truly enjoy the process. The passion I have for this hobby is something I feel I will carry with me for a long time, and hopefully I've been able to share some of it with you. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Until next time, clear skies.